You are 34. A McLaren 750S is parked under showroom lights. A blue so deep it looks black until the light finds it. Then it looks like something poured rather than painted. 19 miles on the odometer, $324,000, wired the day before. The salesman shakes your hand and says congratulations like the word is too small for what it's carrying. Your father doesn't speak. He isn't looking at the engine or the paint. He's looking at you because for the first time in the history of his family, someone he raised is not standing on the outside of a dream, pressing their face to the glass. Someone he raised is holding the key. You are 8. Your brother, Deshaun, still believes the truck is just a truck. Your father drives a 1994 Ford F-150, faded red going to rust at the wheel wells, 211,000 miles on it. A passenger door that only opens from the outside if you lift it 3 inches while you pull. He calls it dependable. Your mother calls it a placeholder. A placeholder is just a word for something you've stopped expecting to change. Every morning before school, you sit in the cab and listen to him turn the key. A click, then nothing. A click, then a cough, like the engine resents being asked. Your mother stares straight ahead and doesn't say anything, which is somehow louder than if she had. Your father pats the dash once and says, "Come on now," the way you'd talk to a dog that's about to bite you. The engine catches on the 3rd try most days. Your father says, "There we go," in a voice built to convince you before it convinces him. One Wednesday, the truck dies in the school pickup line in front of everyone. Not a slow death. It lurches, backfires once, and a thin ribbon of smoke lifts off the hood like the truck is surrendering. A kid 2 cars back yells that your dad's truck is on fire. It isn't. Your father gets out in his work boots, already rolling his sleeves before he even reaches the hood, and gives you a look that says nothing is wrong here, even though everyone watching knows something is. That afternoon, a copper-orange Corvette passes you both on the 2-lane heading home, low and loud, gone before you can really look at it. Your father goes quiet in a way you'll recognize for the rest of your life. You ask what kind of car that was. He tells you. You ask if it's expensive. He laughs once without much air behind it and says, "That's the kind of car a man buys after life finally stops testing him." You don't understand the sentence. You keep it anyway, the way kids keep the sentences adults say when they think no one's collecting them. One Sunday, before a weekend shift, the truck won't start at all. Not a cough. Silence. Your father sits with his hands on the wheel for a long moment, then gets out, zips his jacket, grabs his lunch pail, and starts walking the 2.5 miles to the plant. You watch him from the window until he's a shape and then not even that. You don't understand money yet. You understand shame, though. The way your mother lowers her voice on the phone with the electric company. The way your father parks around back when your aunt visits. The way a whole street can watch a man walk to work and nobody offers him a ride. Your neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, is 64, retired from the rail yard, and keeps a full toolbox in his garage he never fully unpacked. He drifts over some evenings for $10 and whatever's left in the coffee pot, and between the two of them they keep the F-150 breathing another year, then another. "She's stubborn," Mr. Alvarez says one night, elbow deep in the engine bay. Your father says, "Runs in the family." Your Uncle Reggie shows up one Saturday in a silver Cadillac so clean it looks rented, though it isn't. Everyone drifts outside to look. Reggie steps out like the car added 2 inches to him and says, "Brother, one day you gotta upgrade," laughing at his own line. Your mother smiles the smile she uses for things that aren't funny. Your father laughs too, but that night you see him sitting alone in the truck with the dome light on, not going anywhere, just sitting. You watch from behind the curtain and make a promise you don't have words for yet. Not for them. For him. You are 15, bagging groceries on weekends, wearing a name tag that never sits straight no matter how many times you fix it. Every Saturday around 6, a burnt orange Nissan GTR pulls into the lot, and a man in a watch that catches every fluorescent light steps out to buy flowers he never seems to be in a hurry about. The whole lot turns to look. When he leaves, he starts it. And for 3 seconds the sound erases everything. The vest, the name tag, the truck at home that might or might not start tonight. A coworker beside you laughs and says, "Man, people like us don't end up in something like that." You laugh too, because laughing costs less than admitting you believed it for a second. That night you search the car online. The photos load first, then the prices, and the prices don't feel like real numbers. More than your father makes in 5 years. More than every vehicle your family has ever owned combined. Your mother's at the table with the bills. Deshaun's asleep with a comic book open on his chest. Your father sees the laptop glow on your face and asks what you're looking at. You close it fast and say nothing. He knows it isn't nothing. He sits down next to you, and instead of telling you to be realistic, he says, "Dreams only embarrass you around people who quietly buried theirs." Then, "If you ever get the thing, make sure the thing doesn't get you first." You nod like you understand. You don't, not yet. You will. You are 22, first real job, a badge and a cubicle, and a manager who says, "Let's circle back," like it means something. $51,000 a year, wealth to your family. A rounding error to your bills. You drive a used 2007 Toyota Camry, 138,000 miles, a headliner sagging in the back, paid for in cash, which nobody in your life claps for. At work, the Camry becomes a small joke, mostly courtesy of a guy named Brett, sales, 26, always somewhere near a conversation about money. He leases a white Tesla and parks beside your Camry on purpose. "Bro," he says, looking it over, "you're too old for a car that sad." You say it starts every time. He says, "Bare minimum," and laughs like he said something clever. That night you open a spreadsheet, income, rent, food, insurance, debt, savings, and stare at the number left over if you don't upgrade the car, don't move somewhere nicer, don't dress like you make more than you do, $520 a month. You drag the formula 10 years out. What shows up isn't a McLaren. It's not close. It's just breathing room. You sit with it a long time, then say out loud, to no one, "Okay, that's how it starts." Nobody claps for that either. Nobody even knows it happened. You are 26. The Camry's at 176,000 miles. The driver's window sticks a third of the way down, and you've learned to nudge it with your palm while holding the button. Your salary's crept up. Not rich, just quieter about being broke. On the side, you've started building something small. A bookkeeping service for local contractors. Mostly word of mouth, mostly evenings. It barely pays for itself yet, but it's teaching you to keep going without applause. Quietly, your investment account has crossed $71,000. Nobody at the office has any idea. They still only see the Camry. Brett's Tesla is gone. Now it's a financed BMW, $740 a month, which he calls a reward. At lunch, he eyes your keys on the table and says, "Still driving that thing? You make real money now. At some point, looking broke is a choice you're making." You laugh like it doesn't land. It lands. That weekend, you take Priya to dinner. She's a nurse, drives a used Subaru, has never once mentioned your car or your phone or anything you didn't offer up yourself. At the restaurant, a valet eases a red Ferrari toward the entrance and every head on the sidewalk turns, including, for a second, yours. Brett's voice runs through your head anyway. Priya notices you go quiet and asks where you went. You say nowhere and almost tell her everything. The GTR in the parking lot, the spreadsheet, the promise you made behind a curtain at 8 years old. But instead you just say you want to give your family a different kind of life. She doesn't smile like it's sweet. She nods like she's weighed it. "Then don't let anyone rush you into faking it," she says. Driving home with the windows stuck open, a matte black Corvette Z06 pulls up beside you at a light, engine idling like a held breath. The driver doesn't look over, doesn't need to. The light turns green and he's gone before you fully process the sound. For 1 second you hate your own life, not because it's bad, because your dream just passed you doing 60 and you were standing still. You get home, open the account, and raise the monthly number to $780. Your hands shake a little, not from excitement, from refusing yourself again on purpose. You are 29. The Camry dies on a Tuesday in a grocery store lot. No drama, no smoke, just silence when you turn the key. You sit there with a gallon of milk sweating in the passenger seat, and for a second, you're 8 years old again, listening to your father say, "Come on now," to an engine that isn't listening. The tow truck driver asks how long you had it. 6 years, you say. "Got your money's worth," he says. He has no idea. You buy a used Accord with cash the following week. Brett sees it Monday and calls you the most boring, successful person I know. And this time it doesn't sting, because by then your investments have crossed $260,000, and the bookkeeping side gig has turned into something you can't call a side gig anymore. 2 clients became 11, 11 became 40, and you've hired someone part-time just to keep up. A few months later, you leave the badge and the cubicle behind for good. Your mother cries on the phone. Deshaun yells so loud through the receiver your ear rings. Priya hugs you in the parking lot outside your old office and says, "I knew you were building something real." Your father just asks, "You sure about this?" You say yes. He nods. That's as close to crying as your father gets. By 32, your net worth crosses 7 figures. You don't post it, don't buy a watch, don't tell Brett. You barely tell yourself. A few weeks later, you drive to the rental house your parents have lived in since before you can remember and put a folder on the kitchen table. Your mother asks what it is. A house, you tell her. A real garage. A roof that doesn't leak in March. No bucket under the hallway ceiling. Your mother covers her mouth. Deshawn cries before anyone else does. Your father opens the folder slowly, looks at the photos, the kitchen, the yard, the 2-car garage, and asks, "You bought this?" "Yes." "For who?" "For all of us. For you." The room goes quiet in the way a family goes quiet when it's been strong for longer than it should have had to be. The following month, you help them move in. Mr. Alvarez comes by to carry boxes even though his back complains the whole time, and stands in the new driveway looking at your father like he's looking at proof of something. "About time life handed you a garage," he says. Your father laughs, then turns away fast enough that nobody quite sees his face. You are 34. The appointment is at 10. You almost cancel twice. And it isn't the money. The business runs itself these days. The portfolio could survive a bad decade. The debts are gone. The emergency fund could outlast a war. It's something else. For 26 years, the dream was the thing that kept you moving. What happens once you're standing close enough to touch it? You bring your father. He wears the collared shirt your mother irons, even though he insists it doesn't matter. In the car, he's quiet. You ask if he's all right. "I don't know how to act in a place like this," he says. "Me neither," you tell him. And it's true. The showroom is all glass and low light. The salesman greets you by name, and for a second, it feels like he's mistaken you for somebody else. You walk past a Porsche, a Ferrari with its nose low to the floor like it's stalking something, a Bentley sitting heavy under the lights like it doesn't need to prove anything, a Bugatti roped off like a museum piece. Then you see it. The McLaren. That impossible, depthless blue, sitting under the showroom lights like it was built specifically for whichever version of you finally stopped agreeing to stay small. Your father stops walking, says nothing. The salesman starts in on the carbon tub, the twin-turbo V8, the numbers people quote at car meets, and you hear pieces of it, but mostly you hear the F1, 150 coughing in the cold, your mother's voice on the phone with the utility company, your uncle's Cadillac in the driveway, a co-worker's voice saying people like us, your father's voice from years ago telling you not to let the thing get you first. The salesman hands you the key. It's heavier than you expected. Your father looks at it, then at you. "You bought this?" "Yes." "Cash?" "Cash." He looks away, but not quickly enough, and you catch the shine in his eyes before he does. You hug him, not the quick kind. The salesman finds somewhere else to look. And for the first time in your family's whole recorded history, a car isn't being bought to solve anything. It's being bought because something finally finished healing. You get in. The seat holds you like it was measured for your ribs specifically. Your father stands outside, not touching the paint yet. "Get in," you tell him. He shakes his head. No. Until you say it again, and he lowers himself into the passenger seat like he's stepping into a church. You press the start button. The engine wakes up loud enough that he flinches, and then he laughs. Not a polite laugh, an actual one, the kind that belongs to a much younger version of him, from somewhere before the plant, before the walk in the cold, before his knees started aching. You understand, right there, that this was never about anyone who doubted you. They were always too small for a dream this old. This was about giving your father a room he never got to stand in. About your mother smiling a way she couldn't afford to when you were small. About showing Deshawn that the ceiling of that rental house was never the ceiling of his life either. Neither of you says anything for a second. Then your father says quietly, "Looks familiar." The light turns green. You pull forward, and for a few seconds, it feels like every name in your family tree is riding along in that passenger seat with him. By evening, you pull into your parents' driveway. Your mother comes out first, then Deshawn, then Priya, already smiling like she's been waiting on the porch all afternoon. Your mother stops a few feet away and doesn't touch the car at all. She touches your face instead, because she's the one person who still sees the kid at the window before she sees anything parked in the driveway. "Still my baby," she says. Deshaun circles the car twice like it might vanish if he blinks. Priya doesn't go toward the car either. She walks straight to you, looks at your father, then at you, and says, "This is what you meant." You nod, because she's the only one who ever really got it. Neighbors drift over, phones come out, questions come fast. How much, how fast can I sit in it? Your mother watches everyone circling the car, but her eyes keep finding you instead. That night, after everyone's gone, you sit in the garage with Priya while the engine ticks as it cools. Deshaun's still out there staring at it through the window. Your father comes in with 2 mugs of tea, hands you one, and stands next to the car for a long while without saying anything. Then, "Your grandfather wouldn't believe this." You don't answer. "Wish he could have seen it," he says. You look at the car and say, "Maybe he does." Your father rests his palm flat on the hood like he's still confirming it's real, then says, "I used to think making it meant people stopped looking down on you." He pauses. "Now I think it means their looking just stops mattering." You drink the tea before it's cool enough to drink comfortably. Tomorrow it needs insurance, fuel, a service schedule, a place to sit through the winter. It won't fix anyone's loneliness. It won't make anybody respect themselves who didn't already. It's aluminum and rubber and leather stitched by someone you'll never meet. But tonight, it's proof. Proof that what a family survives doesn't have to be what it hands down forever. Proof that a line of people who spent generations getting by can still produce one person stubborn enough to want more than that. Proof that the first person to cross a line never really crosses it by himself. You think about yourself at 15 in that grocery store lot, hearing a stranger's engine and believing, for 3 seconds, that it belonged to somebody else's kind of life. You wish you could go back and tell him. It doesn't. Eventually. If you survive enough of the years nobody's clapping for. Deshaun knocks on the garage door glass and asks if he can get a ride tomorrow. Your father says, "Your mother goes first." From the kitchen, your mother calls back, "I heard that," and everybody laughs. Not the kind of laugh people use to cover something up. A real one. Later, alone in the garage, you look at the McLaren and watch the blue hold the reflection of everything behind it. The old truck, the stuck window, the spreadsheets, the years of not yet, the promise you made at 8 without any words for it. You realize the car was never the finish line. It's a receipt. A receipt for every version of you that refused to quit, and for everyone before you who carried the weight without ever getting to see the view from here. You are the first person your family tree has ever produced who owns a car like this. You will not be the last. Once one person changes what a family believes is possible, the story doesn't get to go back to what it was.